2360 students. I hope everyone had a great last couple of weeks. So we completed Module 3. So Module 3, just to recap, we really went over looking at the differences among children and how they are similar and how they are different. And when we talk about that, we talk about in terms of inclusion, preschool, or early childhood environment. You also started your case study project work. So you had to email me which student you wanted to complete your project on. So remember, if you chose the student, you will continue to use the same student for the further project work we will be completing in this class. So this week, we're going to move into Module 4. Now remember, just a reminder that each module is 2 weeks long. Okay, so you'll have 2 lessons within 2 weeks. So the best way to space that out is to kind of work on one lesson at a time. So that'll give you maybe 1 week you work on one lesson, the next week you work on another lesson. Something also that's going to be happening is that you will have to complete another case study project. So when you were working with your case study project or your child in Module 3, you were learning all about their disability. So you were learning about what that special needs were, you were learning about that child, maybe the background of that child, where they were transitioning to, you were looking at the schedule of that new center or preschool they were in, and kind of what was going on with that child, their likes, things that were being noticed. So what we're going to do is, now that you have some background knowledge of the student and as well as the information on that student's disability, and you created this PowerPoint to talk about the disability, you're going to look specifically at planning for inclusion, right? So we need a plan to support the child. So that's what our work will be as we continue the case study project. So before we get into that, I really wanted to look at an overview of Module 4. So this is really going to look at how we can partner with families. So we're looking at the roles of family and the challenges they face, and also, how can we get them the resources they need? What does the process look like for them if we're trying to refer a child for assessment or services? And within looking at that partnership, we see the child's parents as that child's first teacher. So they're experts in their own right. So this is something that should always be in the back of our mind. But if we see something's not right and the parent's telling us things and we're meeting with them, there is a referral process to get the child assessed so that maybe we can get them the services they need. So there's this referral process that the parents have to go through. They have to agree to, and we have to assess that child and evaluate them to see if they do maybe have special needs and it falls under one of those categories of disability, not only from state, but we're looking at it under IDEA and where that would fall. So whenever we're looking at these support plans, so say we have a student and we know they've been evaluated and they fall under their disability falls under a category, so we've assessed them and they can now receive services. So we can create support plans for them, also known as maybe either IEPs, Individualized Education Plans, or IFSP, which is Individualized Family Support Plan. So the difference between the two is the age level. So whenever you're looking at IEP, this is school-age children, right? So these are ones entering kindergarten and beyond, all the way up to high school age. When we're looking at IFSPs, we're specifically looking at the supports put in place for a child that has not entered kindergarten yet. So when we say family support plan, we know that the parents have to support the child at home in their setting, or maybe they go to a child development center or a preschool center. They're not ready yet to go to kindergarten. So then we have what we call a family support plan in place. So you're going to learn about the difference between the two, and what kind of services would the child receive, and what are the major requirements under IFSP and IEP. In addition, we're really going to learn about the transition process of what happens when a child transitions into a new center or a new placement or a new school. This usually happens whenever a child maybe goes from home into a preschool or daycare, or maybe a child goes from preschool or daycare into an actual public school setting. So that's going to be part of your case study project work that's continuing. So now that we have created that PowerPoint, you are going to create a planning process when we're looking specifically at transition. So what would that transition plan look like? So when we're talking about transition, we have what we call a receiving team, which is the team that's going to receive that child. And then we have the other team where the child initially was at, right? So we need to make sure the two are working together and both create a plan to make sure that this transition is as seamless as possible and supports are in place for that child during this transition. And then lastly, we're really going to be looking at the environment. How do we prepare that environment? As you receive that child, what do we need to do when we're talking about supporting inclusion in a classroom, right? And what we specifically look at is we examine what does universal design for learning tell us, right? And what does that even mean, universal design for learning? And how is this recommended practice when we're looking at environments? So we're going to look at that. We also are going to start looking at the fieldworks assignment, right? So that will be a separate video as well, but that's not due until Module 5, but we want you to start working on that the entire time in this course. So that will be a separate video, but this is something I want you to go ahead and start looking at. So what you're going to be doing, of course, you're going to be looking at like our focus objectives, like what we're going to get out of this Module 4. What are our focusing or guiding questions that help us really think and make connections to what we're doing in our assignment. We're also going to be reading some chapters. You're going to read and start looking at the fieldwork assignment, and you're also going to be looking at any extra links or supports I give you. Now remember, some of the stuff I give you is really to support you. It is a resource for you, a supplemental resource. That helps guide you into a deeper connection to learning. What you're going to have to physically do as part of your assessment for this module is, of course, you're going to have your Module 4 quiz. Okay, so you'll take that, which you'll have a quiz for each module. You're going to submit to Dropbox your case study transition plan. You'll see the due date is October 8th. And that's continuing with the same case study child that you completed with your first project, which was the disability PowerPoint. And then you're going to have a discussion board. And this discussion board is really to help further your understanding or to give you feedback on your understanding of this module and these two lessons during this module. So let's look at our learning objectives. We need to be able to identify the recommended programs and elements when we say inclusive early childhood programs. What does that look like? We also need to demonstrate and interpret the use of screening and diagnostic instruments when we're working with children with developmental disabilities. And this goes back to that evaluation process to see if they receive services either under IFSP or IEP. And then we need to know and understand how to work effectively with a multidisciplinary team. Again, going back to that transition team. And how are we going to coordinate programs, connect with parents, collaborate with other resource and communities and schools. So that is what our goals are. And then up here you're seeing, like, I want you to be able to define the role of families in inclusive early childhood environment. How do we collaborate with them? What roles do they have? How do they help us? Discuss the impact of disability on the family. Describe what the process of referral is to see if the child's eligible to receive services. We're going to summarize the major requirements of what is included in IEP and IFSP. Define program transitions that will impact young children and their families. Okay, so that's part of your transition plan you'll be completing in your case study project. Identify methods to ease transition. Again, that's connected to your transition plan. And then we're going to be able to describe physical, social, and temporal environments. That goes back to that universal design principles, right? And you're going to see those connections when we look at our field work, because you will be looking specifically at that when you do your field work assignment. Okay, for each lesson, for the 2 lessons for these 2 weeks, I went ahead and gave you some guiding questions to make you really think. I always tell students it's a good idea to kind of read these questions before you start the lessons to get an idea of what to be looking for. The next thing is the chapter reading. So you actually have 4 chapters I want you to read. You can see here what the 4 chapters are. Partnerships with families, so that goes back to one of our objectives and goals. How do we collaborate with and partner with families? What are their roles? How do they help us? Especially when we're looking at what their role is in the transition process. We're looking at the assessment and evaluation process, and what requirements are in IFSP and IEPs. Reading about the transitions put in place to support inclusion, and then arranging the learning environment. So these last 2 are really going to help you with your transition plan. So make sure that you definitely look at chapter 13 and 19. Okay. There's always extra resources out there available for you. I always tell you, I know this is a lot of content. If you can't go through it, save this and download these things to do at a later time. I feel these resources, especially these supplemental resources, help you as an educator in early childhood, especially when you're working with children who have disabilities or special needs. So here you see I have the DEC recommended practices, development of exceptional children, and then our division for early childhood, and then we have a module here that talks about family professional partnerships, right? So it's a connect video. So make sure you watch these. They're really good, and look at these. They're really good resources. Here's your vocabulary. So these are really key concepts that contribute to your knowledge for you to make a deeper connection and understanding with the objectives for this module. Okay, and then it's going to start your first lesson, 4.1. As you can see, I'm not going to click on each one of these. I'll click on one as an example. The first one, the Division of Early Childhood Recommended Practices for Families. This is really going to just tell you a little bit about how they would support you when we're looking at planning successfully for young children who have special needs or disabilities or developmental delays. So when we're building those partnerships with families, we can really look at what practices support that. This is also going to help you when you do your support plan, your transition plan. So this just really looks at what does the Division of Early Childhood recommend as practices for families, and then how can you communicate this to them. There's a video that really talks about families and recommended practices and the 3 principles associated with family practices. And then there's a article here that talks a little bit further about it. Okay, so the next one is challenges that families face. So think about a child who has a disability in the parent and what they face, right? So how can you as an educator support them? Well, we can look at helping them accommodate their schedules, really take a chance and time out to listen to the parents, their concerns, respond to their concerns, try to reach out when possible, try to connect them with the right resources, really hear them out and build that partnership with them and understanding. Help them navigate the social service systems, meaning as early childhood, you in your community should have people or resources that you work with, those support networks, and connect the families to those people in the community that can help them. And the next one is really looking at the steps of the evaluation process. What are the steps when I try to assess a child to see if they are available to receive either IFSP or ISP? So this is talking about the differences between Part B and Part C under IDEA, okay? IDEIA, And what that means is we're looking specifically at the process of testing, right? Before that child can actually receive services. So the first thing you look at is identifying and referral, identification referral. So you identify there's an issue, you spoke with the parents, you're seeing something going on, you can refer them for assessment. They have to do the intake and family assessment, so we dive further into that. We have to look at the child evaluation process and the assessment. So what is involved with this evaluation? Then we're going to look at the IFSP. How do we develop that? What kind of goals do we make for the family? What kind of plans and supports do we put in place? And then we also look in the IFSP, what do we mean by service delivery in transition? Remember, this really is going to help you, this last section, when we're supporting the family and putting the transition plan in place. I also gave you some other resources down here. There's a really neat video that talks about partnering for success. So this is a Head Start video, and it talks about inclusion and partnering. Like number one, it talks about preparing for an IEP meeting. What would constitute? How do you get prepared? How do you have successful IEP meetings? What is your part as an educator? How do you contribute to that process? How do we put them in action? These plans or these support plan for the child. And then the last part really is looking at identification and referral, right? So what is the role that you have when you're trying to figure out what the developmental problems are and identify them, okay? So it also gives you some tips when we're talking about developmental delays of how you're going to communicate with the parent. So think about the things that you would encounter in the classroom with a child who maybe is delayed some way developmentally. Okay, it could be a physical issue you're seeing. You could see non-communication skills or non-verbal skills. There may be some social emotional issues. You may see some repetitive behaviors. There's a number of things that set them apart when we're talking about reaching those developmental milestones. Okay, if you see a delay, we have to put supports in place. So with you, and you're having to put those supports and communicate this with the parent, it's important for you to take some tips and some strategies when you're putting these together. So make sure you read these because it gives you a clue in how you can communicate in an empathetic way and make sure your partnership is strong and the parents have confidence in knowing that you can help support them. How do you approach the parents, right? There's even a training like an interactive simulation of how someone's having a conversation with a parent and a teacher. That is discussing those developmental concerns. Okay, so this is a really good way for you to see how this conversation would go. Okay, that's going to be all of 4.1 lesson. 4.2, we're going to get more into what you're going to do when you're doing your transition plan. So what are program transitions, right? Now remember, this is going to be really part of your fieldwork assignment. So make sure you look at that. When we're talking about transitions, this can mean that a child was at a homeschool setting or a home-based service, and now they're moving to a Head Start or a public school. So that would be one part of the transition. We're also looking at going back to that part B and part C under IDEIA, right? So the children at age 3 move from part C to part B, right? So from early intervention to school age services. So that would be from IFSP into IEP, right? And this is challenging for not only the parents, but the program who's going to receive the child and the child themselves. Okay, so this video really helps you understand how to hear families out and some recommendations they make for educators on how you should discuss the transition and how your support is going to help make this transition easier. Supporting transitions, what strategies can you as a professional do to support this process? Okay, so what does the Division for Early Childhood recommend? So what are those key practices to support better transitions? This is really going to help you, almost like a checklist when you're creating your transition, when we're working with disabilities, our students with disabilities and their families, right? So the first aspect really is going to be communication between you and other education providers, right? This is critical to supporting this process of transition. So information has to be exchanged not only between you and the child and their family, but also to the people or the set of the new practitioners receiving, or that new setting the child's going into. The second key aspect you're really looking at is really presented in how are you planning these strategies? What are the strategies you're using? Are they evidence-based? Are they really involving that individualization at the child's level? And how is it involving the family? Are they high intensity strategies or low intensity strategy? If we're talking about low intensity strategies, really looking at those that involve many people, groups. If we're looking at high intensity strategies, we're really focusing on that individualized plan that supports the child and the family levels, okay? When we're talking about low, it's everyone. We also have some recommended strategies that you can use, so make sure you look at that as well. Okay, so what are the recommended practices when we're looking at environment and how environment plays a key role in supporting children? So we always say the environment's like the third teacher, right? Because the environment should be set up and planned appropriately, and it's going to influence the development of the child. So not only the instructional development, but all development, the social, the health, those milestones that we're looking for, especially those who are at risk for developmental delays or those who have special needs. Okay, so when we're looking at inclusion, what is Division of Early Childhood recommending? What kind of practices? How should you set this environment up? How are you supporting them? Is it beneficial for the child? How are we designing the environment? Okay, so the first video here is really going to look at the child's environment and changes that can serve the child as part of an intervention strategy, where all things in the classroom are accessible and all children can participate, especially those with special needs. Okay, it gives you examples and activities of how to do this. The next video is really going to be looking at, well, what are the strategies and how to observe if the child's actually implementing some of these practices. Are they adapting to their environment and the changes you've made? Are they using assistive technology to support? How are you using it to support the child? And what are some examples of those activities? Okay, the next part is what we were talking about that's really going to help you with your field work. So it's called Universal Design of Learning. So UDL is the acronym, and what UDL is, it is a practice, or we should say a framework, if you will, of practices and principles that need to be followed when we're looking at environments. So it's basically like a foundation. So when we're looking at these principles of UDL, Universal Design for Learning, it's going to let you see that in the environment itself, there are certain characteristics, and the environment should be set up like accessible, so it's accessible for all children. They're able to use all of the things that you are including, and it's inclusive for them, meaning it's supporting them based on their special need or disability. Okay, so over here, I gave you a table that kind of walks you through the principles in this table. So on the left side, you have the physical principle. On the right side, you have the educational application. So how it would be what are some examples of how it would be used in the classroom? Okay, so here on this page, it gives you some more examples of universal design. The three pictures really represent the concept of what we mean by universal design, like accessible furniture. Do you adjust the furniture? What kind of seating are you using? Do you have pictures, representations? Do they have writing surfaces to put on? So it's really looking at how are you setting up and designing your classroom so all of those students can learn, even those who have physical limitations maybe. That's one of the examples. Okay, so there's also some more on universal design in education. This is just really a great illustration that gives you the key idea behind what it is. There's also a checklist here that is really great because this is the framework of Universal Design for Learning. So please make sure you look at this checklist. So that's going to be completing the 2 lessons. So what I want us to look at now under Module 4 is really going to be your assignments. Now, obviously, you're going to take the Module 4 quiz. Before we get into the case study transition plan, I wanted to talk to you about the discussion activity. So in the discussion activity from Module 4, we're really going to look at thinking back to where you learned about partnership with families, right? And how it would be to raise a child with a disability. So you're going to go to the page from Connect Module 4, which is talking about family partnerships, okay? And you're going to scroll down and listen to the 5 audio clips there, okay? There's even a transcript. If you're not an oral learner and you're more of a visual or read-write, there's a transcript. You can read the parents' comments there if you prefer to do it that way. You're going to download the form. So I'm going to show you what it looks like. Okay, so in this form, after you listen to the audio clips, you're going to complete this form. Now, the audio clips are really interviews from people who have experience with family members and practitioners. So make sure you can see it. Let's move it over here. Okay, so looking at this, you're going to listen to the audio clips, and it talks about practitioners and how they work with families. So what you're going to do after you listen to the audio clips, you're going to give at least 2 suggestions that you would incorporate in your own practices. So imagine if you were in your own classroom, or if you even work in your own classroom, what would you incorporate? What suggestions do you have? Okay, after you do that, and you're going to do it for each of the audio clips, you see you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you'll give basically 10 suggestions, 2 for each one. After that, you're going to do reflection. When you're writing your reflection, I want you to look at these 3 questions. So which of these suggestions that you gave particularly spoke to you? Remember, these suggestions are from the actual videos. So which ones did they give you that really you would incorporate yourself? So it's not like you're coming up with your own suggestions. It's the ones you're hearing from the audio clips. So which one of the suggestions given in the audio clips really spoke to you, and explain why? The second part is going to be, what do you feel that you could be confident in when you're implementing these suggestions? And what parts would you need guidance or support with? And what specific skills might you need to improve on to fulfill your role as you're partnering with families? So I really want you to think about that. That's a multi-part question. The other question or prompt that has multi-parts is the last question, which just says, what do you see as the challenges and rewards of building a partnership with families who have children with disabilities? And do you feel these differ from working with families of other students? And in what way? Okay, so there's a minimum of 300 words for your reflection part. Okay, so once you get done with this, you are going to submit it under discussions. So if you go to discussions, so once you complete that document, you should be able to type directly into it. Do not create a new document. So once you open the document, you should be able to hit enable editing, and you can type your answers directly in there. So to submit your discussion, you will just click on Module 4 Discussion Activity, Parents Speak Out. When you click on it, you should be able to start a new thread. Now, I always tell students, when you're doing a discussion, just like I mentioned in the first module, is to put your last name, so this is an example, and then put the title of the discussion. Cannot type today, sorry guys. Parents Speak Out. And then you would come down here, add your attachments. you would search for the file that you just saved and completed, you would open it, and then you would submit it and then hit post. Okay, now remember, you need to reply to at least one other classmate's discussion. Okay, so that would be one of the assignments this week. The other one I want to look at is more of your project work with your case study child. Okay, so for this, we talked about how you're going to have a transition plan. So normally what happens is this means that the child's either going from a home base to a school or Head Start, or maybe they're going from Head Start to a actual public school like kindergarten. So what your role is, you have to help be a member on this team to support that child, right, in your case study. So now that you have lots of information about the child's disability and background, your role is to act part of the transition planning team. So what you're going to do is you're going to realize that there is a receiving team, right? And receiving team is the person who's going to get that child, okay? So remember, that child has already been evaluated. They are going to receive services. So they're going to have the child's IEP or IFSP has already been established at this point during this transition planning process, okay? So you're not going to be part of that planning team. You're going to be part of the planning team where you receive them. So what you want to do is you're going to identify who should be part of the planning team. Okay, be specific to the child who is in your case study. In other words, don't list someone who was at her old program. You're going to list someone who is at her new program. So the practitioners and educators involved. And we just want to make this transition as seamless as possible for this child. Okay, so remember, this is not the same thing as what an IEP is. Okay, this is thinking about the people who impacts the success of the transition to the new program, or maybe not. So what you have to do is think about what the purpose of a transition program is, right? It's to develop a plan that will make sure that all involved parties, that's the family, the child, the sending program, and receiving program, okay? How are they going to help everyone feel successful and get off to a good start? What kind of relationships are we going to build? And making this a positive experience for that child and everyone involved. So now think of the planning team meeting and develop the rest of the plan. So here's what you're asked to do. You're going to set goals and identify challenges within that family. So we're going to come up with 3 broad goals, okay? You're going to identify what some of the possible challenges might be for the child, the family, and the program you're planning for. So this is a receiving program. Now, problems sometimes arise because there's different demands placed on the family and child, right? This could be things like location, transportation, maybe there's more students in the classroom, maybe the hours of the program is a little bit longer. So these are challenges that might be faced. So if this is the case, also one word to add would be someone's not trained in working with that specific disability. So you have to come up with some goals that are achievable during this transition plan. Right, so remember, when you're looking at these goals, they're usually from the very start up to 3 months, no more than a few weeks after that. And you're going to be writing activities to show how these goals are measured and they're achieved. So the next section is really going to be a series of questions that really make it clear to the sending program and the family and receiving program of what their role is in the transition process, right? And there's questions you have to respond to. Now remember, when you're responding to questions, you're going to do 2 or 3 sentences for each question as your answer. So you need to develop activities that support the goals, okay? So this is what kind of activities is a child going to have to do before they actually start the new program, okay? What activities do they need to do after they start the program? Okay, so consider what the child's disability is, the family needs, and the type of programs, program staff. All these things need to be taken into consideration when you're doing your planning. And then the last part with any plan is you have to see if your goals are being met. So you're going to have to design a follow-up and an evaluation procedure. Okay, So this is really just following up with the family to make sure that everything is going good, they're getting supported, and make any adjustments necessary to the process, the goals. Now remember, this is not a plan specifically talking about the student's academic IEP process, right? This is really looking at those family partnerships, the supportive relationship, goals of helping that child transition seamlessly to get the support they need. Okay, so there is a form you're going to use that you will have to download and complete. Okay, now remember, this transition plan is worth 25 points and it's part of your case study project. So this is our big project for this course. Okay, so what you're going to do is click on this form. Bring it over here where you can see it. So as you can see, you can enable editing, which means you can type inside of here. And what you're going to do is to make sure that hold on just a second. Is to make sure that you are describing the transitions occurring. Okay, so this form, I'm trying to make sure hold on guys, I'm trying to make sure that you are getting this form and seeing it, because normally it shows me what we're looking at here, but I'm not seeing that. Okay, let me pull it on over for you, and hopefully you're seeing all of this. Okay. So what you're going to do in your transition plan is put the child's name at the top. So if you've been working with Clayton the whole time, you will put Clayton. If you've been working with Johnny, you would put Johnny. So you're not changing your child. You have to keep the same child that you did for the PowerPoint presentation. So what you're going to do in the first section of this form is identify the planning team. Okay, so these are the essential members of the transition team and what their roles are. Okay, so decide who can and should support the child. This is one of the most crucial steps. So individuals and what their roles are in the transition plan. Then you're going to make 3 goals. Now, if you look here, this is what I meant by these are not going to be educational goals. These are going to be goals to support the challenge, the goals of the child developmentally and the challenges that come up. So effective communication. What are goals that you want to come up with? And then what are the possible challenges that you might face from this goal? Positive relationships. Okay, what is a goal for a positive relationship? What might be a possible challenge? And what would be a goal for supportive environment? And what might be the challenge? So then what you're going to do is you're going to come up with 2 to 3 sentences and respond to these questions, right? So what role does the sending program have in this transition? So I want two sentences for this answer at least. What role does the parents or family have? So what part do they play in this transition process? And what role does the receiving program have in transition process? And then what we're going to do is we're going to look at specific transition activities, right? So when they're preparing for the new setting, what activity could you have? What number or goal? Okay, so here's important. You're going to put what activity would support that child. What goal is it connected to? So is it number 1, effective communication? Is it 2, positive relationships? Or 3, environment? Okay, so what you need to do is when you're coming up with goals or activities, you need to have an activity for at least each goal. And then tell me what the description of the activity is and who's responsible to carry out this activity. And then we're going to make sure that we have meaningful activities that help support once the child is actually in the new classroom, right? So remember, this is for the people preparing. So this is the sending team, and then these are the activities for the receiving team, okay? So remember, you've got to do goals for each because it takes a partnership and a team, okay? And then you're going to do a follow-up evaluation process. So how are you going to determine that these goals have been met? So what we're going to do then is you have a rubric here, and this is going to be how I'm grading you. So once you complete your project and you save it, you're going to upload this into the Dropbox. Remember, it's due October 8th, so you do have 2 weeks to work on this. Remember, go back to your case study child. Look at what is going on. Look at everything that you wrote in the beginning on your first part of the project, the PowerPoint. Look at everything that you can gather information on underneath that child to help you with the planning process. All right, so one thing I do want to note is underneath the table of contents in our class, you can click on Inclusive Practices Fieldwork. I told you I want you to start reading those. There is an explanation video here for you that I uploaded that is going to speak about the project and what you need to do as far as making sure you are meeting the field work. Hello everyone, my name is Misty. So make sure you look at that, and then I'll do a follow-up video talking about field work a little bit more in depth this week or next week. But remember, this is something you should already start working on at this point. All right, guys, so that's everything for Module 4. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out. Some people have been emailing me, some people have not, but just make sure that you are interacting with me. At least that's why I try to do these videos, because it's very difficult in an online class where you're not in person. So feel free to reach out should you need anything or have questions. All right, guys, until the next video, take care.